Hey guys, it's Jamie with the Fishing for a Reason podcast. I hope this episode finds you well on this Wednesday morning or whenever you are actually tuning into this podcast. I'm going to share a little bit about what we were doing this last month. And you may have noticed there were a couple missing episodes in our lineup, and for good reason. Scott and I were in the remote backcountry trout fishing and hiking and backpacking the John Muir Trail. So tune into this episode if through hiking is something you're curious about, or maybe you've never heard of, and so you didn't know you were curious about it, which was my case prior to this experience, because I'm going to give you all the behind the scenes details about what this trail is, what it was like to do it, what it was like to plan it, and some common questions that we get after the trail. So I'll dive into those details throughout this episode, but we also have a part 2. So next week, next Wednesday, you'll definitely want to tune in because it will be my mother interviewing me and Scott and John, our third partner on this journey. 3 of us hiked this together, and you'll get all of the behind the scenes experiences and details and questions answered from multiple perspectives. Because one thing I definitely learned about through hiking is each person has their own unique experience on a journey like this. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background just so you guys can understand what the heck I'm even talking about. But the John Muir Trail is a 211-mile hike. And this trail goes through the Sierra Nevada. In fact, I will quickly share my screen so you guys can take a quick look at it of where this thing is. So I'll share my screen. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can see it. For those of you that are not watching and are tuning in via audio, I'll just explain it. But we start in Yosemite National Park. You can see this. This is my slug line. I actually did not start the slug line at the initial starting point. It's a little bit further than this at Happy Isles. So you can see we hiked all the way through Happy Isles, and then we went north to Tuolumne Meadows, excuse me. Follow me to Tuolumne is how you actually say it. And then we crossed several passes and down into Inyo National Park, ending this hike 211 miles later at the summit of Mount Whitney. And Mount Whitney is the highest peak. You can see it right here. Mount Whitney is the highest peak in the contiguous United States. So it's the tallest mountain in the lower 48. And this hike ends at the summit of Mount Whitney. Needless to say, there's 11 miles that you have to actually go down 6,000 feet to actually finish the hike and exit the hike. So in our case, we hiked a total of 239 tracked miles. We did a couple side trips, and that accounts for that. But it's very common for anyone who's hiking the John Muir Trail to go over that 211. That 211 just talks about the span of the actual dedicated John Muir Trail. So what inspired me to do this hike was funny. I don't know. I'm an adventurous person. I like to try new things. Scott and I have done some marathons in the past before COVID nixed that. And once COVID nixed the marathons for a hot second, we never got back into endurance running. We'd done 3, and our plan was to do 2 a year, which was fun to have some sort of challenge to train for. And that's one of the beautiful things about any sort of journey or challenge like this is I love the process of planning it, thinking about it, of training for it, and then doing it. The actual journey of doing it, the summit, that moment we summited Whitney was so incredible, but it wasn't the highlight of the whole experience. It was the journey that was the highlight. And so I was seeking something that resembled our marathon training. I call it type 2 fun. It's not, oh my gosh, I can't wait to go run 5 miles, or oh my gosh, I can't wait to hike up 1,000, 1,500 feet with a pack. That doesn't excite me. But at the same time, the accomplishment of pushing myself beyond what I thought was possible, pushing yourself beyond what you thought you were physically or mentally capable of doing has so many rewards that are it's like layers of an onion. You keep peeling back the different things that you're learning about yourself and about what you're capable of. And it fuels more growth in other parts of life. And so that's why I really love those kinds of challenges. Anyway, I found a book called Journeys North, and it's called Journeys North, the Pacific Crest Trail by Barney Scout Mann. And I'll make sure to link that. But again, it was like, okay, what is this? Pacific Crest Trail, It's very close to where we live. I've heard of it. I know people that have hiked parts of it. I don't really know anything about it beyond that other than people hike it. And so I started reading this book, and what really struck me about the book wasn't his descriptions of his experience and how hard it was and challenging and how beautiful at the same time. It was more about the internal stories each individual went through. So he shared the stories of all these trail people that he met over this 5-month long, 2,600-mile journey from Mexico to Canada, and the different transformations each individual went through by embarking on such a cool journey. And that is my jam. I love stuff that really makes you see life in a different way once you complete it. And it planted the seed of, oh, through hiking. I didn't even know that word until I read this book. And that concept sounded really intriguing to me. So didn't want to take 5 months off of work and hike 2,650 miles to start my through hiking adventure. But the more I did some reading, I kept devouring different books to explore this topic and see if it's something that I actually would have the interest to do. And I found a book on the John Muir Trail, which happens to be part of the PCT. It kind of weaves in and out of the PCT, and it's through the Sierras. So in Northern California, the Sierras are just absolutely incredible, as they were described in all of these books. A lot of elevation, obviously, since Mount Whitney is part of that range. So it just sounded really intriguing. And the more I researched it, the more it was one of those trails that's like bucket list you must do. So I thought, okay, you can finish that in about 3 weeks. That seems like a reasonable amount of time to try. And if I hate it, I don't have to do the PCT. But the PCT is really what drove at least the research behind this. So after thinking about it, I did ask John, Scott's friend from the Navy. So they were Navy buddies, and he's an avid elk hunter, loves to hike. We've done a lot of fun outdoor adventuring together. And so I was like, I wonder if he would do it with us. And he said yes. He was totally interested in doing that because he had always talked about somebody might Mount Shasta. So I figured, why not see if he would be interested? And he said yes. And so the three of us started planning this journey. This was back in 2023. When I read the book, it was early 2023. I think John confirmed he wanted to do the hike with us in November of 2023. And so then I was like, okay, I got to figure out how to plan this thing. So started doing more research, and I'll share the process. And I'm talking like, I'm not a backpacker, guys. I'm like a 0 to 60 person in a lot of different ways of, I don't know. I think I went backpacking one time with Scott and it rained. And so we only did one night. And then we tried to do a couple more backpacking trips and it never worked out. It ended up just being a day hike with a heavy pack on the back of you. So I didn't really know if this was going to be a thing that we would even enjoy, let alone as a group, how we would manage. So there were so many things that we learned throughout this experience. But just to give you a little glimpse of what the John Muir Trail looks like, it's 211 miles. You will gain 46,000 feet total. The average group finishes between 2 and 3 weeks. After doing it, I'm like 3 or 4 weeks. I don't know how those guys do those fast weeks. The best time to hike this trail is between July and September. And permits are a little bit challenging. So in our case, like I said, we hiked 239 miles. The elevation total that we gained on our experience was 47,636 feet up. And we went down 43,711 feet. So it is a big up and down. We went over, actually, there's 8 passes. And I looked, and I think Cathedral Pass didn't feel like a pass because it was under 10,000 feet. So it's actually we went over 9 passes and then summited a mountain at the end. And I'm not kidding you. It is up and down, up and down. Every single day, you are gaining and dropping elevation in a significant way. And it will challenge you in physical ways and in mental ways. And it was absolutely one of the most epic, most beautiful places I have ever been in my life. This trip was incredible. And if you have any interest to do a long through hike in a place that honestly takes your breath away, every single pass, every single corner you turn, do this one. Not only that, I brought a fishing rod. I brought my flat rod and had a blast catching trout on this trail because there's some really great lakes and really great rivers and creeks that are just full of really hungry trout. So it was a blast to go out there in this most incredible backdrop, see a mountain in the background reflecting off this water. And I'll make sure to cut to some footage as I'm speaking here so you guys can get a glimpse of what this actually looks like. There's nothing like it anywhere.
Fish are jumping.
It's absolutely spiritual. I don't know how else to say it, but it was one of the most incredible things I've ever done in my life, and I would 100% do it again. That being said, it was hard. So I decided to take the fly rod and carry the extra weight because fishing is just a cornerstone of our lives. And even though it's something that I really got into a little bit later in my life, it's brought so much joy and connection, not only to nature, but also to Scott, my partner in life. Because of fishing, we met and we're married, and we are building our legacy around this sport we call fishing. It's done so much for us, and we want to share that with other people. So, of course, if I have a chance to drop a line in the water, I'm going to do it. So, I brought my fly rod, and there's actually 4 different species that you can catch on the John Muir Trail. You can get golden trout, which are only found in this region, which is super cool and super unique. Rainbow trout, brown trout, and brook trout. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that was really what inspired me to bring the fly rod. Was just, I wanted to have that experience of catching a fish and eating it in the middle of nowhere, like completely remote. And it was absolutely incredible. For the record, I am a terrible fly fisherman. It's not something I'm good at because I haven't spent the time doing it. I've done it a little bit in Iliamna, Alaska, when we worked up there at a fishing lodge, and it's a different ball game up there. But just to be proficient at casting, not catch trees, not catch weeds. I caught all the things except for fish in the beginning. Took me a while to figure out how to get back into it. But once I got it figured out, at least got a rhythm down, I could place the fly where I intended to. And that did create a lot of opportunities to catch some really great fish, which was super fun. So one of the things about the John Muir Trail is once you've made the decision to actually hike this trail, the planning begins. And for me, I couldn't really get into planning or really get into training until I had a permit. It's one of the most competitive permits to get in the country. So because of that, I did a bunch of research to try to figure out, all right, what are my best ways to do this? And it's a lottery system. So 6 months before your step off date, you can apply for this permit. And there's 2 main entry points that people do on the John Muir Trail: Happy Isles in Yosemite Valley and Tuolumne Meadows, also in Yosemite Valley, but there's a big gap between those 2 locations. It took us 3 days from Happy Isles to Tuolumne Meadows. Tuolumne Meadows happens to be an easier permit to get, so a lot of people will just start there. It's even easier to start at Mount Whitney and go north. Going north, if you look at the elevation profile, I was like, no, thank you. Your first day is summiting a mountain, like the biggest mountain in the lower 48. No thanks. From a sea level girl and knowing how altitude sickness can affect people, I really wanted to start and go southbound from Happy Isles. So it's about 4,000 feet when you start at Happy Isles, and then eventually you end up at the 14,000 foot mark, but you're going up and down passes, and you're basically acclimating yourself as you go. That seemed to make a lot more sense to me. And also, I've heard that going the southbound direction is just really beautiful and very popular. Because of that, getting a permit out of Happy Isles is really competitive. So for me, I needed to get that permit before this trail felt extremely real. So Donahue Pass is the pass that exits from Yosemite National Valley into Inyo National Park. And you have to have a Donahue Pass eligible permit to actually complete your trail. They limit the amount of people that can go over that pass because they're trying to limit the amount of impact on this trail. So it makes sense why they do this. And so it is, I think it's limited to 45 people across a day is what they're targeting. So to get this permit, you can put into a lottery 6 months in advance. So, as an example, if you were going to hike in April, November 10th would be your lottery date. And so you'd sign up for the lottery, you put your window of time in, and if you're flexible, you put the names of everybody in. And I'll make sure to link a video below this that shows that process. You go in, you set up for the lottery, and then you find out within that week if you actually got the permit that you want. I just kept getting denied, and 90% of the people that put in for this lottery do not get the permit they want. And it's really hard to think, all right, if I don't get this permit, do I even plan for this hike? What do I do? And what I learned through this process, so after you do not get the permit you want, what I did is I just continued to enter the lottery for the next 3 weeks, thinking I'm just going to get at least something. So we know that we're at least going on this trip. And I did end up getting a northbound permit out of Cottonwood Pass. So that was one way to do this. Is it's easier to get northbound. You can at least get that locked in. Do you have something? And then I did end up putting Tuolumne Meadows as my first choice. That's a less competitive permit, and I immediately got it. So I don't know if there's anything to that, but for somebody who is considering doing this trip, you could go that route, put your top choice and try to get the golden ticket. And if you have a hard time, just put your second choice first. So at least you have something. Because once that lottery window closes for your specific permits, here's what's interesting. People cancel. Like, this is a big, big, big trip and a huge commitment, and life happens to people. When someone cancels a permit, it automatically shows up in there as available. So you could check back anytime throughout the year and find your date is available if somebody happens to have canceled, which is also really hard to rely on and frustrating to think that that is your only option. So the other thing that you can do is two options. 2 weeks out before your start date, you can get a walk up in the Recreation.gov by getting on at 7 a.m. I think there's 15 permits that they drop 2 weeks prior, and then you can grab them. And it's really hard. I got a few that way, but I never got the one I needed. We had some time restrictions based on work schedules in our group. And so we had a very specific time we were trying to start, and I never got that exact time. So I did the best I could. We ended up starting later than we had hoped because of this. And then we just tried walking up literally into the office. And they said, yeah, if you are here at 11 a.m., the day you want to walk off, anything that's not been collected, they then release and you can physically pick it up while you're there. So it's such a long description, but it's one of those things that if I was actually planning this trip again a year ago, I wish somebody told me all this. So what ended up happening is I probably got 6 or 7 different permits that hopefully worked for our time window. I had a backup permit that I had gotten 6 months prior that at least told me I'm going on this trip and gave me a reason to train and a reason to plan, a reason to get gear. Like, we're going on this trip. We just don't know the exact start date. So that was the challenge. But we ended up walking up, getting a Happy Isles start on August 25th. Right at 11 o'clock, 3 permits opened up and we were able to scoop those up. If somebody really wants to learn about permitting and wants help with this process, because you really want to do this trip, I am here for it. I'm here for it. I spent so much time doing this. And it's a really difficult process. But after hiking the trail, I do have an appreciation for why they do it. There's a lot of major cities that are within driving distance that makes that park extremely popular. And it's beautiful. It's so beautiful. That being said, if you want to do this trip, you absolutely can. You just got to be a little bit strategic about how you plan your timing and your permitting. And a little flexibility goes a long way, especially if you're relying on the lottery. Okay, that was a lot about permits, but it is a big part of it. So now let's talk about preparing physically for hiking such a large span of miles. One thing that I've always been a pretty active person, but I'll be honest, this past year has been a little bit rough in the working out department. I've definitely fallen off the wagon, as you say, of working out consistently. So I'll be a very inconsistent person of maybe a couple times a week here and there, doing some walking. I'm not running anymore, for the record. So you don't have to be a marathon runner to do something like this. And what I was doing to train is I actually would ruck. So I had my pack, which you can see over here. I have some gear to show you guys, but I had my actual pack. And what I wanted to do was get comfortable with that pack prior to going on this trip. So I bought a sandbag by the company Go Ruck. So rucking means just carrying weight essentially. And then you fill this bag with actual sand. So I bought like 50 pounds of sand, put them in plastic baggies so I could change the weight, and I'd put it inside that rucksack and then put the rucksack inside of my pack. Benefit of that is your pack is designed to distribute weight in a way that's not going to really hurt you. So it puts most of the weight on your hips and not so much pressure on your shoulders. So for me, doing those rucks, I would just go on like a 2 mile or 5 mile, or sometimes even do laundry around the house and carry my pack around just to get used to how to adjust my pack so it fits right. That was the main thing I did for training. And I was consistent with that training in the spring prior to our trip. And we actually went late August to September. Our trip was 22 days long. We started August 25th and we finished September 15th. I had started rucking, wearing my pack with weight, probably February, March of 2024 prior to our hike. And I was doing it, I'd say, on a weekly basis. And then about a month and a half before we actually went on the trip, I stopped working out completely. So I do want to give you guys context that I've heard John Muir Trail is not for beginners. I almost disagree with that. If you've never backpacked before, I would not do the John Muir Trail as your first hike because you might hate hiking. I would say if you're a beginner backpacker and you're willing to do the research and you believe in your ability to mentally say, I'm going to complete this, you can do it. Anyone can do this. Absolutely. The age range that we saw on the trail probably were several people are in their 20s range. Late 50s, early 70s was another big demographic that we saw out there. So really the people that had just graduated college or high school, and then this group of retirees that have the time. So if you have the time, I don't care what age you are, you can absolutely do this. It's really a matter of taking the time to prepare your body and your mind to be able to handle this kind of a challenge. So that was my training plan. Yeah, basically, I just didn't do as much training as I should have in hindsight. The one thing that I will say that I did have an advantage is my shoes. You have to know what works for you. And there's only one way to figure that out, and it's miles. So I have always worn Brooks running shoes for marathon running, the street shoes. And so what I did is I did a little bit of research on those Brooks running shoes, and I just got the exact same model or type of shoe in trail running. Did a bunch of research. Some people like to do hiking boots. For me, trail runners made the most sense because they're lightweight and they are breathable. They dry quick. We're in the Sierras in California, so there's not a lot of weather. And if there is weather, it's hot, so it'll dry you out. But with that, those trail runners, Brooks Cascadias, were amazing for me. Now, Scott, me, and John all had the same shoe. Scott and I did 100% fine with those shoes, but we have been using them for over 3 years. John's feet were destroyed. He got 15 blisters. You'll hear about that story in the next episode. And there's only one way to figure that out, and that is time in the shoes, unfortunately. I would say from a training perspective, that probably was one of the most important things was footwear. The other big thing that I did prior to going is fuel. So understanding how my body processes food and what kind of calories I need and what consistent levels of proteins versus carbs versus fats. One thing I've been doing that I didn't realize how well it translated to the John Muir Trail is I've been tracking. So I would say the average person does not track what they eat. I've been working with a coach for a long time just to try to better manage the way that I'm putting nutrients into my body. As I get older, I see the importance of understanding that. And the first thing they had us do was start tracking. I tracked all my food in MyFitnessPal for a few months, and that gave me the understanding of what my body needs to fuel. My first training hike, I was just so eager to get on the trail. And June was actually when I did my first real backpacking trip. It was a 6-day trip. 4 of the days were with a group of girls, and then I went on a 2-day solo trip. And it was just me really wanting to see what it's like to go out in the woods by myself with nobody else to rely on but me. And can I do it? Can I handle it? Will I freak out in a tent by myself? All these questions in my head that I just wanted to see if it was possible. So I planned a trip out to the coast, the Olympic National Park, another one to add to your list if you like backpacking, and did the South Coast Trail for 2 days, which was amazing. So back to tracking, because I knew my macros, I also knew that we had to use bear cans. And that's one of the challenges when you're planning your food situation is in California and in the Olympics, you're required to use bear cans. This is completely bear proof. And the reason being is bears are smart. Um, Larger size here. But bears are smart. And so what ended up happening is as the trails became more popular all over the place, bears got creative getting people's food. And they started hanging around where people are because they knew people equaled food, which causes all sorts of different problems. So it became mandated in certain parks to require bear cans. On the John Muir Trail, you were not allowed to hang food. So this was my bear can. I opted for a smaller can because I knew in life outside of the John Muir Trail, I would be doing a lot of hiking. And this one is a lot more manageable than something this size, which is the size they actually recommend for the John Muir Trail is the full size because it can hold more contents. But I carry a smaller pack. So just to show you, this is a 46-liter pack, and the full size bear can honestly just doesn't fit in there. It would take up the entire pack. All of my food for the longest stretch between resupplies would not have fit in this container, but I had Scott with me and he had the bigger can. And so we mix and matched, as in, like, I carried the tent, the water filter, the cooking system. Like, I carried a lot of our other stuff so he could carry more of our food. And it worked out really well for a couple. So that's a good tip if you are going to go with a partner with couples. And if you have one person that has a huge pack and one person who doesn't, then you can get by with that smaller bear can. So with that, because I had been tracking my food, I decided on that 6-day training trip to plan as if I was not going to get to resupply and see if I could actually energetically do these hikes in these days on the contents, the caloric contents that I was using in that MyFitnessPal. So I knew what I needed as a baseline for my protein, as a baseline for my fats, and a baseline for my carbs. And because I had a small restrictive bear can, I also was looking at options that pack down really well. So protein powders were big to get in a little bit extra calories, but not take up a lot of packing space. So items like pastas and stuff, they were too big and bulky for me. The other thing that I really found, these things are great. And they're 2 servings. If you look at the back, what we found is the guys definitely ate 1 pack for a day. I could get by just fine with 1 actual serving as a smaller female. And so the actual size of this item is pretty big. So what we would do is we would take this and we would dump it into individual little plastic bags. So you just put it in like a plastic baggie. It takes up way less space and you still know what you're getting calorically. So all that being said, as far as food is concerned, I would highly recommend going on at least a 4 to 5 day trip and testing out your food, and make sure when you do that, you track it. I knew because of that 6-day trip that I was kicking butt energetically. I actually got more energy over time with the amount of calories that I had used. Because of that, it made planning for our trip in September really freaking easy for me. I knew what I needed. So I just ordered it online, put it in the resupply things, and we were good to go. So that being said, this is 22 days. And you have to resupply in order to carry 22 days of food. Your food is the heaviest thing that you'll carry. There's a few different locations on the trail that you can resupply. We decided to resupply at Red Meadows. I think that was day 5 or day 6 into the trip. And then we resupplied again at Vermilion Valley Resort, which is a must stop if you go on this trip. And then we resupplied again at Muir Trail Ranch. So you basically, for Muir Trail Ranch and Red Meadows, you take this bucket, you fill it full of your stuff, and then you ship it to your resupply location. So once you're hiking there, you just grab it, organize it, and you're good to go. So we were able to drive and drop off our buckets and at Red's because we left our car in Mammoth Lakes, which is where Red Meadows is very close to. Muir Trail Ranch was too far away, so we did have to mail that. Give yourself 2 to 3 weeks before that time. Like, you want to get it in the mail at least 2 to 3 weeks before your hiking date. The resupplying part and the food part was quite the process. Again, if anyone is really interested in this stuff and wants to know more, please reach out to me in our free Facebook group linked in the show notes. I think it's so easy to overplan for something like this because it feels like this huge adventure. And it's, I need to know exactly how many miles I'm going to go and where I'm going to camp and what's the water source is going to be like. Honestly, you don't. You need to know what you eat prior. You definitely should do some hiking. Don't test your gear out on the trail. That'd be my other big tip. Don't test your gear out on the trail. Do it before. Figure those kinks out before you ever step off on the trail. Feet are huge. Feet are huge. Feet are huge. Feet are huge. Make sure you know what shoes are best for you. And I would say put some miles on those shoes. I personally would not go into a hike like this on brand new shoes, even if it's the same brand I'm used to. I probably would test them out for a few weeks and make sure there's no rubbing, no blisters. Things can be weird when they're manufactured. So just knowing that is a big piece of this. Your feet are your friend during this trail. As far as fishing gear, I just brought a Pro Light fly rod, a really nice light rod. I brought this Wild Waters case. So I have a Wild Water rod also. And then I have a really nice fly rod, but the case is amazing. So I thought, oh, I'll just take this and I will strap it to the side of my backpack. And it went around like this with me. And it worked great. Honestly, the one thing that I regret is this case is too heavy. Pack weight is so important. And one of my most painful stretches was because my pack was too heavy. It weighed in at 48 pounds during our biggest resupply, and I was in a lot of pain for a couple days. It's amazing what extra weight will do to your feet. And again, that was just a learning mistake that I made on the trail. And I did run into a couple other guys that were fishing out there, and they had some really creative ways to keep their rods lighter weight. You can use a Takara rod, which basically has no reel, and it's just like you're casting. That works fine on the John Muir Trail. I liked having a reel and being able to really extend that cast out a little bit further. So for me, I still would have hiked with a fly rod and ate the extra weight per se to have that reel in here. But the case, there was a guy who, and we talk about it in the next episode, there's a guy who we ran into that was using fluorescent light tubes. So like bulbs, fluorescent light bulbs, big skinny long bulbs. He would use the plastic tubing that those came in as his fly rod cover. And that's brilliant because it still protects your gear, but it's extremely light compared to something like this. Yeah, I will show you what I brought. And this is a girl who had no idea. I had no idea what to do. My Wild Waters reel. This is not my nicest fly reel because I was hiking and I knew I would probably beat it up by just walking around. So that little guy worked perfect. And then I love my Pro Light fly rod. And I won't pull the whole thing out, but you can see how pretty it is. And this is a 9-foot rod. It's a 6-weight. It's got a lot of action. And it's just a really nice lightweight rod. Super fun to fish. And it's pretty. I really like it. But they have different colors. Pro Light, they'll custom make rods for you if you know exactly what you want. But this thing was a champ. And then as far as flies, just talk to the locals. It was really great because I was carrying a fly rod. Anyone who was a fisherman saw my fly rod attached to my pack and they'd stop and talk, which was awesome. So they'd tell me, oh, hey, I was fishing up on the trail at this lake and this lake. Tell me exactly what flies they use. And in fact, the day we stepped off, we stopped to get lunch or something right before we left. And there was a gentleman who had just finished the trail and he saw my fly rod, came over and said, oh, are you going to fly fish? And what trail are you doing? And we told him the John Muir Trail, and it was his first hike. He had a really amazing time on that hike, and he basically pulled out all of his flies and gave me a bunch. This is what you need. So it was really great. I, again, am not an experienced fly fisherman at all. And I think that was one of the beautiful things about taking a rod on the trip is it's so much fun to be a beginner in a new fishery. People are so willing to help if you're willing to ask and listen and learn. And you know what? I caught so many trees and so much brush, but it's okay. Just clean it up, retie it, no big deal, cast again. And it only took a few days and I totally had the rhythm back down. And then catching that first fish, oh my gosh, I remember it. It was right after Tuolumne Meadows. We had gotten our second permit. We found this super cool campsite. Like the river was running over these rocks, almost like the whole riverbed was a rock, one big rock. So cool, these like rock pools. The coolest people. Boys discussing the plan for the night. So it was like river running on these big slabs of rock. And so we were able to rock hop across it to a campsite that we saw. And this was a super cool little campsite. We were low enough elevation we could still have a fire. So we set up camp. It was getting really dusky. It was absolutely beautiful. In fact, I'm going to cut right here in this video so you can see the view. There was a mountain in the background, and a little further past the rocky part of the river, there was this winding grassy meadow, Tuolumne Meadow. And I ended up just casting a line for a couple hours, and it was so peaceful and so beautiful. And right at dusk, I honestly had given up on the fact that I was going to catch a fish because I'd been casting for a while and they were not interested in what I had to offer. That's okay. I was figured maybe I suck at this more than I think. And eventually one little guy just grabbed it and I caught this little trout. It was so amazing. I couldn't believe it. And it was the gateway to me really getting serious about this fly fishing thing. But yeah, it was so much fun. Got the little guy on shore and took a picture of him. He's a little brook trout. It was a really exciting moment. And again, it's one of those things like when you get over that hurdle of, I don't know if I can do this, to it just happened. It just makes you think about all the different possibilities that are coming next. So yeah, it was really, really fun. And I caught him on this little caddis fly right here. You can see that. Another fly that I did the best with were woolly buggers. A guy suggested that I just use these, and I had a blast with these things. I fished them quite a bit. Also these guys. But yeah, the trout, they are voracious. They are voracious eaters. What I found is the higher you went in the alpine lakes, the more ferocious they got. It was really fun. The biggest challenge that I faced on the John Muir Trail, I think for me, it wasn't the physical aspect of things. It was the team aspect of things. So there was 3 of us, Scott, John, and myself. And I guess when you're with somebody for 22 days straight, hour after hour, I don't care who you are, it's different dynamic to be with people that long. That being said, we met so many solo hikers on this trip as well. And I always thought I'm a pretty introverted person, so maybe I would do a solo hike in the future, like a long one. But those moments that you come over a pass and you look on the other side and you see this insane, expansive, like rockery and valleys and mountains, it's so beautiful. It is one of the most beautiful landscapes I've ever seen. And you want to share that with somebody. And I think that was one of the beauties of being with a group, is being able to share those moments, those hard moments, those funny moments. We just had a blast together. That being said, like learning to work through your dynamics, because you all have a different hiking speed. I'm 5'1" 3/8". My legs do not go as fast or as far as the 2 6-foot guys I was with. So there's things like that. Like some of us are really fast going up. Some people are really fast going down. Some people need to take more breaks. Dynamics of groups. And some people want to camp at a certain time. Some people don't want to hike a certain amount of miles. Like you're working out your group dynamics, and you won't know those dynamics unless you've hiked together before. So if you've done a long hike with your teammates, which I think would be great to do if you can in advance, then you'll learn that stuff and you'll be prepared for it. We didn't. I'd done a couple hikes with Scott, but so infrequent, and only one night was the most we had ever done. So this was all new, even with Scott. So I would say the hardest part for me was learning how to mentally manage those thoughts of I want to do it my way versus we got to work together as a team. So yeah, just from a personal level, that was definitely my biggest challenge, but also my biggest opportunity for growth. So everyone's going to have different challenges on the trail. It might be physical, it might be mental, it might be both. Either way, like physically, I actually felt my biggest pain issue is I did have some plantar fasciitis in the beginning until I really got in the groove of things. And over time, my body got stronger. I lost a ton of weight and I just got stronger. I got faster, I got stronger, I got more resilient. And I honestly feel like I was hiking pretty powerfully towards the end of this trail. And we ran into several different people that explained the same experience. So it just depends on you, and hike your own hike is a common phrase because every single person's experience, even if you're in a team, is going to be different. And I think that's what's so beautiful about doing something like this. One of my best fishing moments on the trail was we had gotten to Virginia Lake, and it was early. One of the hard parts about fishing is I wanted to do it all the time. And there's all these incredible places to do it. But you had to manage, like, all right, are we going to get in our miles, or are we going to stop and take a break and do fishing? And so I tried to do lunch break fishing because a lot of times by the end of the day, I was pretty gassed and not really wanting to go drop a line in the water. Not every time, but sometimes. Virginia Lake, we actually got there at 10 in the morning, which we'd only been hiking for a couple hours. And usually we would not have stopped. And I don't remember why. What's even weird is it was super windy that day, which isn't ideal for fly fishing, but there was something about it. We had a recommendation from somebody that said, hey, if you get a chance, drop a line in Virginia. So got to Virginia. I just made sure to stand downwind so my cast would go further. I was like, oh, wait, what the heck? I'll try this. And my first cast out with a black woolly bugger, let it drift a little bit, and then bam, fish was on. And it wasn't just a little dink, it was a fish. It was like, holy shit, this is like actually a fish. So I got the fish in, and actually, right as I got him to shore, the line broke, but I just reached out and grabbed him because I was not letting that thing get away. And it was a beautiful rainbow trout. And I was so freaking excited. I think it was about 14.5 inches. John measured it for me. And we were just stoked. I couldn't believe I got a fish that size. So I handed the rod to Scott, and he pulled out a brown trout.
Scott got his first trout in. What kind is it? What a pretty fish. I think, is it a golden? That is beautiful. Look at that thing. It's stunning. That thing's so pretty. I think it's a golden. Could it be? I think it's cutthroat. Oh my gosh, we need to work on our trout ID.
And we decided to eat those two because most of the trout we were catching were really little, like little 6 inchers, 7 inchers. But these were over 14. They were beautiful, big, robust fish. So we just took our cooktops. We put a little bit of water, or we had these cups that we use for cooking right here. In hindsight, I would bring a little pan next time, but this worked fine. We just filled it a little bit on the bottom with some water. And then I had a little seasoning pack that we mixed all the different seasonings in and steamed it and had fresh trout.
Looks good. One more time.
The three of us shared it. It was so delicious. That was such an epic moment. I think my biggest piece of advice for somebody who wants to through fish and through hike the John Muir Trail, number one, get your permit and commit. Just commit to doing it. And even if you don't get the perfect permit, you can work your way into it. If you are determined enough, you can get on the trail. The second piece of advice I would give you is understanding your macros and knowing what your nutrient needs are, and using your gear for at least a good 4 or 5 day trip prior to your actual big hike. The third tip I would give is don't overplan it. As much as it sounds like I did a lot of planning, although I did, it mostly was gear, understanding the gear needs and the food needs for me. But getting on the trail, once the permit situation was figured out, was like, you just hike. You just hike like it's your job every day. And you cannot even describe what you're going to find on this trail. You'll see some of the most incredible country. You'll meet some of the most incredible people. Yeah, it was an epic experience that I think everyone should add to their bucket list if you like to backpack and you like to fly fish. Stay flexible. If you get to a lake or a river, if you get somewhere and you're just like, wow, this place takes my breath away, which will happen every day on this trail, and you want to stay, then stay. Stay. Swim in that lake. Experience what it feels like to just sit there and stare and be in nature. Cast a line for an extra hour. Just stay. So give yourself the wiggle room to have the flexibility that you're not just trying to crunch miles to beat a timeline. Really wish we had a few extra days, and which is probably a reason I'll go back and do it again. One of the mistakes I made that I would also recommend you avoiding is overpacking. I think we all did this. So one of the things that we did was we parked at Mammoth Lakes, and I'll show you quickly here where that's at. But this was a win. I'm so glad we did it this way, because just the logistics of this whole trip can be confusing of knowing where to go and what to do. So Mammoth Lakes is right here. Here's our start. And we parked our car here. And the benefit of that is it was a very easy bus ride to right to our trailhead. That was awesome. The other benefit of that is once we were hiking and we stopped in Mammoth Lakes, because Red Meadows is in Mammoth Lakes, to resupply, we were like, okay, really thankful that the car is just in town. So I could hop a shuttle, which I did with a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't need that we realized we overpacked. And I just dropped it off in the car. So you can actually just park the car right at the ski resort there and take a shuttle from Red Meadows to the car and then back. And it's free to park. So that was a huge win because we ended up really shedding some unnecessary items in our pack. So having the car there, I think, was a really great option for our trip. I think the other biggest mistake I made was not trusting myself. So a lot of times I'm a people pleaser. I'll just be honest. I tend to try to please the crowd when I'm with groups. And that's sometimes why I enjoy being solo so much, is I don't think about anybody else. And I think a lot of women can relate to that. But when you're hiking and you're taxing your body and you're doing elevation for the first time and you're climbing thousands of feet up and then thousands of feet down, and you're just learning this whole process, your body is going to tell you what it needs. And there were times where I needed a break. I needed to rest my feet for 2 seconds, and I need to eat something. And as the slower hiker of the group, I would talk myself out of those breaks. And then I would have some frustration if I was too tired when I ended up catching up with the guys or whatever. And I think one of my mistakes was not just leaning into what I needed, because it was fine. I caught up in 5 minutes, right? It's easy to overthink things when you're on the trail and not just let the journey take you, and also embrace the conversations. That was another massive thing that I didn't expect, where the different people we met, you'd cross paths with somebody and for some reason you'd strike up a conversation and we would go really deep, really fast. We would get to know each other in a way that I don't know that I can compare to anything else in life, because you're not waiting in line at Starbucks with all of the noise and life around you. You're in the middle of nowhere in this incredible place, and you both chose to be here. And there's something deeper behind that, and you go deep quick. I made some lifelong friends that I text on a weekly basis after the trail. And I think taking the time and not being in such a rush. There was one gentleman that said, what did he say? If you're here to make miles, you are doing this trail for the wrong reason. And I that resonated so much with me, because there's things that will pop up, people that you meet, places that you stop that just light your soul on fire. And why not let that burn for a minute rather than rushing to the next thing, just like we do in life? So I would just say, take time to stop and enjoy the journey. So as we wrap up, I've shared ping-ponged all over the place about this John Muir Trail. And honestly, even as I'm sharing this, I'm like, man, I could write a book about this experience. Every single day had a different lesson. Every single pass had a different lesson. Every interaction with a person was just so fascinating in layers and layers of learning. We got some incredible life advice. We had some really funny moments. It was just a memory I'm never going to forget, and an absolute trip of a lifetime. I can't wait to do another through hike. I will do the PCT someday, that 2,600-mile hike, now that I've done this one. But if you're thinking about through hiking, or even if you're like, I don't even know if that's my jam at all, I really encourage you to do a little exploring on the idea. Go do a couple backpacking trips locally. Check out the Olympic National Park. It's incredible. Or near Baker. That's a really great area too. You can do the Wonderland Trail around Mount Rainier. We have so much incredible country here right in our backyards. And alpine fishing is amazing. Bring a spinning rod, bring a fly rod, get out there, toss a line in some of the most beautiful places in the world. Catch that fish, fry them up and eat them, and just get out there and do it. Just my biggest piece of advice is don't wait Do not wait for the perfect year, the perfect time, the perfect season for this to happen in your life. Make it freaking happen. This can happen anytime you want it to. You can start living your big life adventure right now. It doesn't have to wait. And I think so many people wait. So many people wait. And you're missing out on so many things if you just embrace the journey and the messy side of it and get going. Just one step in front of the other. Book the trip, make it happen. The only hike you'll ever regret is the one you didn't do. So get out there. Start fishing for a reason.